Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Theory of Racelessness YouTube channel. If you'd like to see more, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon to get notified every time we post a new video. To get even more involved, feel free to leave us a comment down below and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear them. Now, enjoy the video.
I think the global context actually reinforces or lends credence to what you're saying. Because if I think about this idea of buying into the existence of race, having come or grown up in a completely different country, the concept of race is very, very different. I don't think Americans realize how truly race obsessed this culture is. And the fact that you can transpose someone in different cultural contexts to come away with totally different ideas and constructions about race does lend credence to your ideas here. Have you kind of thought about the global context of race and how that affects what you're saying?
Yeah, that's a great point, Melissa. So part of the work I do is to help people relativize how they think about racism, which I spell racism with the word race into it, which is why I tend to pause because that gets completely lost when you say it out loud. But part of the work I do is to help people relativize it because there are philosophers who actually study, does race, capital R race, does that travel? And in the American context, the tendency is to think along the lines of, what this thing called white supremacy, anti-Blackness, it's everywhere. It's absolutely global. It's pernicious. It's in the fabric of the entire world. But when we step outside of the framework of the United States, or when people immigrate from other countries, as you're saying, and they get into the American framework of race and race ideology, there is a dissonance there. I hear from people in Canada and Ireland and England and Nigeria, increasingly in the United States from around the world, either their parents or they themselves, and they're like, what is this thing? I didn't sign up for this. I don't like it. I see the irony of it. I see clearly what's happening. But then I also think of places like France, which a lot of Americans think the French are super racist. I've had people even say that they're the most racist, but it kind of speaks to the debacle that Whoopi Goldberg has been going through, because on the one hand, you have Americans like James Baldwin and Toni Morrison herself fleeing to places like Paris, France, because they're tired of the race ideology in America, right? And they're trying to escape it. And they say, as Americans abroad, they get the privileges of being American. They're not hyphenated American. They're not Black. They're American. Now, there's something to be said about the fact that you can come from Ethiopia and immigrate to Paris, France, and you can experience discrimination. And then the question becomes, is that racism? And this is something I work through with students on a regular basis, is it racism? Like, let's ask the question instead of presuming, because if it's more complicated, if it's more about xenophobia, right? If it's some kind of prejudice, but it's not racism, I think we would do well to consider what it is and not misname it, because again, if we call everything racism, it does make the problem more insurmountable. And then also the Caribbean is a great place to explore these kinds of ideas and concepts, because the history is not completely dissimilar from the United States. And you have a lot of Caribbeanists thinking about this thing called race in definitely more expansive ways than we tend to in the US. And then the people coming from the continent of Africa itself, this is ironic for me because people will presume that Africa is the motherland of Black people, right? That's how Americans tend to conceive of it. But then when you speak to people from the continent, unless they're from South Africa or select few other places, their conception of what Blackness is or what whiteness is, what race is often going to be very different. And many of them will tell you that they perceive themselves as raceless. But you tell that to somebody in the US, they'll default to saying, well, that's because they come from a predominantly Black country. But I'm like, let's not miss the point, right? Like the point is that they don't conceive of themselves in this way, in this framework, whether there are other races in their society or not. And we can learn from that. And what would that look like in a place where there are these so-called different races?
Yeah, there's that thing again of smuggling in the concept as a given and then moving forward, right? So it's like, yeah, they're saying, well, it's because they live in a predominantly Black culture or a predominantly Black area, geographic area. There aren't white people to terrorize them. And that's why they don't think this way. But they've smuggled in the concepts. They've put the framework on top of something where it doesn't necessarily even exist. And it kind of echoes again this whole thing that the whole point is that it's an idea that once you shift your lenses to look at things that way, you can't not see it that way, even if the context makes no sense in a context like that. But I actually wanted to ask you about the Whoopi Goldberg thing, because to me, it struck me as a really interesting case of conflicting frameworks, right? So, for the three people who don't know what happened, Whoopi Goldberg made some comments about the Holocaust. And basically what she said was that what was going on between Germans and the Jewish people wasn't about race, because from her point of view, those are all white people. So it can't be, white on white crime, so to speak, isn't racism, right? You can't be racist against your own race. And that's how she was conceiving of it. And of course, we know that the Jews were considered an inferior race of people by the Germans. And that was, at the very least, a justification for their behavior, or for their animus, right? At least an ostensible justification for it, right? That's at least what they said, whether they believed it or not. And that kind of speaks to the issue, right? Because I can totally see Whoopi Goldberg's perspective. I can understand the math she's doing, right? From her context, she's looking at a bunch of people who to her all look white. And so the conflict between them cannot be put into the race framework that she understands from her kind of, growing up here in America context of like, it has to be between people who don't look the same. Right. I'm curious, what do you think about that whole kind of conflict of frameworks? Because people got very upset, and the criticism is fine, I think, but it's a little strange because it seemed like people couldn't even understand why she would think that way.
Yeah, so part of my research too, and my effort to really, and I mean really understand this thing called race on a global scale across time periods has included and necessitated my understanding of the meaning of race since its inception in the English language. And as a result of that, I've done extensive study in early modern Europe. And one thing that I talk about on my podcast is this history of the word race meaning something different in the European context. Before it gets to what would become the United States, race had more to do with nationality. It had to do with lineage, family, class. It was a way for early modern Europeans to create a hierarchy that was called race. And I kind of view what happened in Nazi Germany as doing that similar work and operating within the old framework of what race is. And in the sense that we could think about racism as being global, a lot of the ways in which people are racialized, there are some people who would argue that racialization, when not in the American context, is a discrimination against another group of people based on ethnicity, which includes culture, religion, and all these other things. So in that way, some people would argue that racism is worldwide because human society, we have found constant pernicious ways to oppress and hierarchize. But if you're not taught that history, if you're not taught about the different meanings of the word race, and if you're not taught to look at the framework of race ideology with its uniqueness and how it operates in different countries and in different time periods, then you do fall into the trap that Whoopi Goldberg fell into, which is viewing it as white on white crime, which feels icky even saying it. And I think that the reaction to her error and ignorance, in the sense that she just didn't know, I think the reaction is super ironic and interesting, and something I've been paying very close attention to, because I would argue that the vast majority of people would have thought the same thing until Whoopi was became the scapegoat, and because people identify her as woke or left-leaning and all this other stuff, which then means they associate cancel culture and all the things with her, that resulted in a backlash that might have otherwise been different if somebody else was saying it and making the same error. So I've been paying attention to the backlash and kind of shaking my head constantly, because the irony isn't lost on me. And I think it's unfortunate that she's being used as a sort of example, but how she expressed how she thinks about racism, I would say you get that in primary school. That's how we're taught. You get that through media. I mean, you get that in all the ways at virtually every level. And I feel like it's less common for people to view that as having to do with race, period.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to support our channel and keep the conversation going. For more Theory of Racelessness, you can follow us on Twitter @Racelessness or use the link in the description box down below. We hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, there is still so much more to come. Until then, thank you so much from the Theory of Racelessness. Have a great day.